Welcome to Black Hat 2026. I'm Mike Shima. Joining me today is Ronan Murphy, Chief Data Strategy Officer at Forcepoint. Thanks for being here.
Delighted to be here, Mike.
So one of the things I've been talking about all day today, we're near the end of the day here, all day yesterday was AI, LLMs, agents. I don't think this is any surprise to you at Black Hat this year. But a lot of it has been, we have agents, we have AI, and AI is dangerous. It feels a little ambiguous, or it feels a little bit of missing well, why is it dangerous? What are they doing? What are they getting access to? And I think you've got a good story about answering that question, and that has to do with data. So I'd love to hear what your perspective is here, that you're talking about risk and data.
Absolutely. Look, in the last 15 years in cybersecurity, we've seen some very defining changes taking place, right? We started off by protecting infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We then moved into protecting applications, which is your world.
Yeah.
Identity became the next big perimeter.
Yes.
And now we are going through a fundamental change once again. And it's not just a fundamental change, it's actually having a profound implication on every organization across the world. And that is, we are now protecting intelligence, which is incredibly interesting because as organizations race to operationalize AI in all of its different types, whether it's agentic or LLMs or co-pilots or applications,
MCPs, we could rattle
the
off, yeah.
oxygen that makes these tools effective is your data.
Yeah.
And within that data lies your intelligence, or what the industry is now referring to as your alpha. And protecting that alpha, protecting that competitive edge, your intellectual property, your proprietary data, your regulated content, the stuff that makes your company what it is, protecting that intelligence has become the new perimeter. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing that every boardroom of the Fortune 1000 are asking the question, if we share our alpha with these LLMs, with these different systems, are we giving away our crown jewels, or are we protecting it? And I would argue that we're seeing a big shift from closed models like the Anthropics and the OpenAIs to an open source environment, which is super, super interesting.
And part of that is that there's definitely a lot of angles I want to go into that.
Yes.
And one of those aspects is you also listed a good history, for perhaps brief, but
yes.
We have had API endpoints, we've
Indeed.
had service identities, now we have non-human identities as well as humans like you and I. And you're pointing out there's definitely an appreciation. How much of that is different, or what do people not realize maybe is there's a nuance here about agents that we have to remember or apply our controls, or we actually have some controls that could help if we use them correctly.
Yeah. So Mike, you know this better than anyone. You've been in this industry a long time, right? But we are the best industry in the world at three-letter acronyms and four-letter acronyms and giving terms, right?
We're up to five-letter acronyms.
Yeah, exactly.
Too, yeah.
and as an industry, we've come up with a term which is Agentic, right? And effectively, Agentic is the ability to build software at scale using your LLMs, right? And it's empowering organizations to drive operational efficiencies by building software. And what we're seeing a proliferation of these non-human identities, these software applications running at scale across an organization, which is tremendously powerful, brings huge benefits. But the big but is that these applications have the ability to access repos and data and the crown jewels, or what I refer to as the alpha.
Yeah.
And that's where the risk lies. Now, here's the problem. You mentioned to me in our introduction earlier that you have a heritage in vulnerability management. And when you think about vulnerability management, there's a good level of standardization. You find a vulnerability, it's disclosed, it gets a CVS, and the whole world knows about the implications. Yes. Data is very different, because when it comes to data, it's almost like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you're a hospital, or if you're in aviation or manufacturing, your definition of value associated with data is very different. So it's non-standard. And suddenly you have these organizations rolling out AI co-pilots, agentic, non-human identities, and it's accessing data in SharePoint and OneDrive and Dropbox and Amazon and Google and Microsoft. And companies and boards are now saying, wait 1 minute, are we losing our alpha? Is our alpha finding its way into models where we could potentially lose this? And all of a sudden, we're seeing a kind of a crescendo here where the CIOs and the CISOs and the governance people and the boards are having to come together and say, okay, how do we operationalize AI safely and securely? And that's where Forcepoint plays.
And what's interesting what you're describing is you haven't even said threat actor or named like a nation state or these attackers. You're already describing what needs to be protected to protect the value and preserve that business. And what's interesting is even some of the examples you use were heavily regulated,
Yes.
whether it's hospitals, et cetera. But a lot of organizations out there don't have that regulation. They don't necessarily have that maturity. So are they even just getting surprised about where their data is? Do they even, I want to guess they have to start with the data inventory. How many data inventories have you seen out there when you go talk to customers?
So what we see is that organizations, data is a bit like water. It's, it's like turning a bottle upside down, it goes everywhere, right?
Can.
And it's growing at an exponential rate. And within that data is your alpha. It's your proprietary information, it's your regulated content, it's your competitive differentiator, it's your trade secrets. And up until now, I would say from a cyber perspective, and a lot of what we would have heard in Black Hat and at RSA and other events over the years was about protecting that. But all of a sudden, we're opening up the kimono to allow all these different technologies access that alpha, access that proprietary information and IP. And for cybersecurity professionals like us, that's a really alarming trend. But interestingly, I would say in the last 30 days, probably since Alex Karp, the chief executive of Palantir, went on CNBC and said the Fortune 500, the Fortune 1000 are really worried about their alpha, about their IP and so forth going into these models and the risk that poses. So when it comes to data, when it comes to that alpha, I think the challenge that organizations are wrestling with is where is the data?
Right.
What is the data? Where do we have potential risk with that data? How do we discover it? How do we classify it? How do we contextualize it? How do we risk assess it? And that's a complex problem because it's not standard. It's a very different problem for a hospital as it is for a manufacturing company.
Yes. And it's a problem that predates the LLMs, but the LLMs are just absolutely exacerbated.
They've just opened it up.
Right, because
Yes.
said, for example, me, there's a governance around me as an employee, what data can I access, et cetera. But if I launch 100 different agents, do they all need the same, are they clones of me or should they be different? How are customers approaching that?
And you've two issues actually. You make a good point, right? You've sanctioned AI, right? But that still brings the same risks, right? Because even if it's sanctioned, how do you know that it has access to the correct data, right? And how do you know that someone can't, generate a prompt that's going to create a major issue, right? But then you also have shadow AI or unsanctioned AI, and that's even arguably more problematic for organizations. So we're seeing companies now looking at this and asking the question, how do we build a run book that allows us to operationalize AI, adopt this very powerful technology in a safe and secure manner, protect our alpha, protect our data, and be in a position where we can demonstrate not just to our board, but also to regulators that we are doing the right thing by the crown jewels within our organization. And that's where Forcepoint operates at. I would argue it's probably an incredibly complex layer that's overlooked by the industry to a degree. But you are seeing, again, in the last 30, 60 days, this is really bubbling up to the surface.
Now, one of the things you mentioned, for example, vulnerability management.
Yes.
My background.
Yes.
One of the traps is to fall into say, look, we found all these CVEs, go fix them.
Yes.
The same can't be true from data. Like you have a lot of data to protect, go protect all the data sounds like the same problem, or the same trap to fall into.
You're absolutely spot on, right? And the problem with data is that not all data is created equal. There's specific data assets that represent far more value to your business in terms of your alpha, right? It might be your financial documentation, it might be your intellectual property, depending on what industry you operate in, it might be your regulated content.
Of course, yeah.
So typically what you find is it's almost a bit like the analogy of how do you eat an elephant. It's one bite at a time. Same with vulnerability management, right? It's looking at an organization, understanding which data assets represent the most value to us as a company, and then understanding where that data is. Is it properly categorized? Is it properly labeled? Is it properly risk assessed? Is it in the right location? And is there a potential risk that an AI application, an LLM, an agent could potentially access that data and create problems.
Yeah, and what you've described is, so if we have our menu for the elephant, we're looking at
Yes,
it. Yeah,
yes.
we do at least have to start with the appetizer before we get the entrees, dessert, perhaps, to play with that as a metaphor. But I want to set that up as, you can't just go to an organization and say, you've got all your data labeled, you have it all analyzed, because there's so much that's contextual
And it's growing at an exponential rate.
Right. So
yes.
what's like the first step? How does a CISO or a security org start that in a way that says, we know we're here at this maturity, we take these couple steps, these few bites, where we're improving in a way that's reducing risk rather than we're improving just because we took a lot of actions.
Yeah.
And that's it. But the action doesn't mean risk.
Yeah, I'm sure in your career, right, you've witnessed the implications of ransomware attack, right? Mm-hmm. And if you ever want to see the mind focused, just go and look at a post-ransomware attack, right? They won't look and say, all of our data. They'll look and they'll say, have they got our customer database? Have they got the stuff that really matters, right? And what you're seeing now with AI, and particularly with this alpha conversation, is how do we address the most valuable assets in terms of data within our organization? So for example, and it's different, right? If you are a manufacturing company, it might be data that's regulated under import-export controls. And that single data asset is the most valuable asset to your business. Yeah. If you're a bank, it might be customer information or PCI data. If you're a hospital, it's healthcare information, PHI. If you're a retailer, it might be pricing files. And what we're seeing in every organization is it's actually becoming very verticalized in terms of the rhetoric and the conversation around the asset for them, which represents either the most value or the most risk. And I think that CISOs that are learning how to operationalize AI safely with having secure data are actually becoming a force multiplier within their organizations. They're becoming very strategic because they're allowing that organization to embrace this technology and reap the benefits of it.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful to hear it phrased like that, because at least a decade ago, if not longer, we already knew that just saying no doesn't work.
Yes.
Good luck trying to stop the business. If you're already saying that the losing the alpha, losing the data is a risk to the business, the CISO can't say stop working with data, because you just insider threat is your CISO. That doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And probably the biggest insider threat right now is Agentic AI.
Yes.
You know?
And so then too, I'll pull a little bit another parallel with like the vulnerability side, where there's the classic case of, okay, we have these vulns to fix, but don't slow down development.
Yes.
That whole velocity versus security, there's got to be something here that hits with, well, we have to label the data. We have to check this, our RBAC, are we granular? Who's accessing this? How does a CISO, how's that organization also avoid that trap of saying, well, slow down a little bit because we have to do all these little details to your data? We want to still enable them, like you said. What's the good solution there?
It's really standing back and asking the question, what assets do we have as an organization that cannot find their way into any form of AI ingestion? And when you stand back and you ask that question, there will be assets, data assets, that are, they're a red line. They should never find a way into Copilot or into an LLM. Yeah. And once that question is asked, you now go to, okay, do we have the ability to find that data? Do we have the ability to risk assess it? Do we have the ability to minimize the risk associated with it? And companies that can answer that question, I'll tell you what they can do. They can say to the board, we are protecting our alpha. We are making sure that our alpha is not finding its way into an LLM where it's training someone else's model. We're in a position where we can demonstrate the adoption of these technologies in a safe and in a secure manner.
Yeah, and what you've explained there is a motivating question that leads to a strategy.
Yes.
Whereas if I say, how many agents do we have? Who's running the agents? Okay, those might be useful or interesting questions.
Indeed.
But those aren't really risk-oriented questions, right? I haven't said anything about security.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when you look at what we do in Forcepoint, we operate at that data layer. Our job is to make sure that the oxygen for AI, being the data, is properly controlled, properly risk assessed. The ingress, the egress, going to whether it's shadow AI or it's sanctioned applications, that alpha is being used in a way that's in line with your policies as an organization.
Yeah, and I think that's hopefully the wonderful message that people take away from this.
Indeed.
Because unfortunately now it's time for our own egress as we run at the end of time. Thank you,
very
Ronan.
much.
Thank you everyone for joining us. To learn more about Forcepoint, visit securityweekly.com/ForcepointBH. And for all of our Black Hat 2026 coverage from Cyber Risk Alliance, check out securityweekly.com/Black Hat. This is our last interview, but don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with Jackie, I think, for our wrap up for the segment for the week.
Thank you, Mike.